Welcome back, everyone. I am the World Archivist, here to bring to you the stories of the wider multiverse. Today, we return to the Fangmoor once more, as I cover the events of the 11th day, and the return of a faction long thought inactive, the Order of the Amber Moon. As always, if you like what I do, consider leaving a like, a comment for the algorithm, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And now, without further ado, on to the story. Well, this was an unfortunate situation. After the victory against the blasphemous humans on the first day, the forest and its denizens had moved to impede the Order's progress by any means necessary. But all it could do was lead them onto false paths, a slight they had avenged by clearing vast swaths of this hellscape, and in their place, erecting fortresses and temples dedicated to the Lord of Man. But now, something else proved hostile. Something within this fog which they found themselves in. For their minds were continuously assailed by some unholy force. Something which sought to break them, to mold them, to control them. But Principality Tokamada and his brothers would not be so easily cowed. Their faith and dedication were more than sufficient to withstand these mental assaults. Not even the faithless would succumb. But it would be beneficial to their task if they didn't have to test the limits of their fortitude. This fog could not, will not, hold them. With but a growl to the others, the order was given to move, choosing a direction and dashing out as fast as their bodies could carry them. Nothing seemed to change as time progressed into what felt like hours, but soon enough, the fog cleared in an instant, revealing a section of the forest which had been cleared of trees, the ground somewhat wet upon their paws, and in the distance, fortifications of distinctly human design. But before they could be studied any further, the panicked cries of a horse drew the band's attention to a group of 5 human riders, 4 of which wore matching uniforms of blue and gold, overcoats draped over their saddles, black tricorn hats, and each of them were armed with swords of excellent craftsmanship. To his surprise, 2 of his brothers were with them, a chaplain and a confessor. How they had arrived here, he would have to find out later, though. The 5th human wore a uniform of similar colors to the others, bearing the signs of battle wear, but despite this state, he emanated an aura of regality which was unmistakable. Before them was a king and a chosen servant of the Lord of Man. He rode forward and spoke in fluent Latin with a voice which commanded respect. "I am King Charles XII, ruler of the Swedish Empire. Who among you leads this party?" The Principality stepped forth and kneeled before him as he answered. "That would be I, Principality Tokomoda, of the Order of the Amber Moon." "Arise then, Principality. Your arrival has been foretold by God. I understand that you have many questions, but let us take this back to the fort, for we have much to discuss." So the Willow is not the enemy it supposedly is? Despite taking on false images of the divine, and leading all of us into this hellscape to kill each other? The insinuation irked the wolfkin to a degree, but the king quickly dissuaded such lines of thinking. I am not suggesting such a thing. We hold no love for the willow either. What I am saying is that there is a greater threat in this place, one with ties to the shadow and the fog. The Oblivion. That would certainly explain why the fog carried an unnatural stench to it. So this Oblivion is contained by the willow? Was contained. The Oblivion is breaking free of its chains. If they succeed, it won't matter what our allegiances, titles, worlds, or even families are. It will consume us all. Indeed, we are all that stand in its way. Now, we can't fight the Oblivion head-on, but we can strike at its servants. We don't know who they are in particular, but we've managed to trace their location to the northern reaches of the forest. I propose we each circle around and catch them in a pincer. Very well. My brothers and I shall move out immediately. As shall we. God be with you, Tokamoda. And to you as well. With their journey through the fog offering no more surprises, they left only to be greeted by an imposing wall, whose top pushed past the canopy out of view, and a gate that, though only ajar, left more than enough space for even the plowbeast to walk through. Inside, they found a similarly sized complex, its doors shut and overgrown, and a labyrinth of other buildings, many far too small for the Agroni to investigate. Regardless, whoever built this place had no intention of staying in it if the overgrowth was anything to go by. As the quiet settled in on the group, a noise drifted in, then another and another. Sounds the group were all too familiar with. Combat deeper into the overwhelming complex. Norio ventured forth, calling upon his trusted scout Kaeda to follow. Ma Narai followed too, mumbling something about making amends. Working their way towards the sounds of battle, they soon made it to a clearing framed by the shadow of another massive gate. This one damaged, its doors ruined, sticking to the shadowed remains of a fairly large building. Norio recognized one of the groups immediately. The green-clad warriors he had negotiated the release of Silex with. Their numbers swollen by soldiers, metal beasts, and some sort of flying rock? They fought furiously against a group of smaller humanoids, clad in reds and greens. Something about them seemed familiar.
Huh. I guess I was right to avoid them back then,
Kaeda mumbled. What?
After the battle with the Bluecoats, I scouted their base. Seemed well organized back then. Seems I was right.
That's right. The fort where they met Moonchild. A number of them laid slain around her. Seems they had recuperated and had something to prove.
Huh. Are you sure it wasn't that cavalier of theirs?
Ma Narai joked, pointing out a particularly well-armed short one on the back of some horned creature. They fought well, but something about the weapons seemed off. The others used curious weapons wrapped in paper and ribbons, but the sword looked completely alien. Sleek black surfaces coupled with a glaring gold trim. It looked just like a horrible puzzle slotted in place into his mind. The Moonchild had talked about creating a weapon capable of felling the willow, and she seemed quite strange when they spoke in the short one's base. but he had put it down to simply being dazed. Her mech's damage showing it had been a mighty battle. But what if the damage was a symptom? What if she was already rough from the weapon's creation and made worse by its loss? She had assured him it didn't exist. She had lied to him. To his face. That conniving little...
Sir?
asked Kaeda. Concern etched into his face. Norio, lost in his thoughts and with his teeth bared, had let out a low growl. I've seen enough. Let us head back, he ordered, composing himself. The walk back had been uneventful, the clashing forces having either failed to notice them or failed to care. Returning to where they had left the group, they could see that they had been able to scavenge some food and the means to cook it, and were currently gathered around the fire, keeping themselves busy. But one element of the scene caught them by surprise. Somehow, there were more of them now than when they had set off. Naoki was the first to greet them.
My lord, I'm happy to see you've returned safely,
she started, watching his confused gaze shift to the trio of newcomers.
Ah, yes. Allow me to introduce Mukai Chieko, Masaki, and Shig.
Chieko gave a deep bow, while Masaki and Shig simply grunted and gave a half-hearted wave. And what are you doing here? Norio asked.
We were hoping you could answer that. One moment, we were outside the Morakui fortress. The next, we're in this place having to scamper and hide for who knows how long, replied Shig.
And your friend? Norio nodded towards Chieko, who was ravenously tucking into her meal.
Don't know,
he answered with a shrug.
Was half starved to death when we found her. Doesn't talk much. Apparently she's a fisher.
And what will you do now? Norio asked, confident they didn't pose a threat. The two darkly dressed ones whispered to each other while the gunner finished her meal. Looking them over, they were fairly well equipped. The one calling himself Masaki even carried a bag of bombs. What he was going to do with them in a fortress is a matter for later. You seem capable. We could use your help. This place holds monsters that could threaten the homeland if they were allowed to be set free. Will you join us? Norio asked.
Chieko, without hesitation, gave a thumbs up. The other two glanced at each other before Shig spoke. Beats rotting here, I guess.
This place was strange yet familiar. Those among the Carolean army, which had originally entered this forest, recognized the rift which had brought in their first reinforcements. But the surrounding area had changed considerably. A small but well-built wall circled the area, and within was a sizable complex of wooden buildings, each one decorated with a series of bright and colorful lights. Or rather, they were decorated. For the signs of battle were quite prevalent, starting from a massive breach in the northern section of the wall. A trail of destruction was carved through the camp. Buildings were torn asunder and bearing the signs of fire damage, and the corpses of elves lay all around. An unsettling sight mixed with dozens of pieces of scrap metal. The king looked upon this sight with a tinge of regret, something that General Armfeld noticed as they rode through the camp. You seem distressed, my king. Is something wrong? Oh, nothing to worry about. I'm just recalling our previous encounter with these elves. They were quite pleasant company. So to see such devastation is quite a... Wait. What is that? Something could be seen in the distance. A purple glow from which more Carolean reinforcements poured out. He could not understand why, but he felt compelled to come closer to it, despite the protests of the general and the royal guards. When he reached out to it, he was overcome by another vision. A wasteland of snow plunged into darkness as the wind blew with surprising intensity. But the only noise he heard was the speech of the elf buddy.
Once, we strung up lights across all the land. The glitter of red and green hues danced for miles across the sky. We were foolish then. Now, we've been granted wisdom from beyond the domains of space and time. Now we know only a silent night, an empty night, an utterly and totally desolate night is a holy night.
Suddenly, Charles was back at the desolate camp, taking in this new information with increasing fury. The elves had thrown their lot in with the corruption of oblivion. His anger at this betrayal was molded into a renewed sense of purpose. For he now had a face to the enemy, and as he looked out into the distance where he suspected these cultists were at, he announced a single ultimatum. So you have chosen death. The moonlight twisted, and the ghostly form of Morgan materialized from the darkness. He had followed Golta's warband since the willow had revealed its true nature. With the destruction of the Knight's largest rift, the protection of their deific domain was lost. Now they were vulnerable to the bonds of shadow. And Morgan had slowly been poisoning their minds and bodies with oblivion. He stepped into a pool of murky water, an Undermire rift, and let the darkness of oblivion spread like ink across the portal. Golta's army erupted from the mud, as swamp detritus rained down around them. Her newly replenished forces surged towards the breach in their defenses. A vast pack of werewolves had smashed through the palisade walls and were barreling towards the heart of the fortress. Howls and war hymns announcing their sudden arrival as the front lines clashed. Golta caught only a few words of their bestial shouting. Tainted! Shadows! Slaves to the fog! What did they mean? Did the wolves think they were agents of oblivion? Was this Morgan's doing? Their motives didn't matter. The wolves wanted blood, and Golta would make them pay for it. A pair of Myclops led the Undermire defense. The towering brutes picked up whatever they could find and smashed into the wolf vanguard. The wolves of the Amber Moon were superhumanly agile. They moved in a blur of fangs and blades, effortlessly dodging and parrying the attacks of Golta's knights. They were far from indestructible, though. The leader of the wolf pack was spearheading the assault, and suffered for his overconfidence. A Myclops crushed the principality with the carcass of a fallen swamp lurcher, and Golta's new bodyguard, a Bloom Herald named Darlock, slew the beast with her halberd. Despite the initial success of the Undermire counterattack, the fortress was falling. The wolves of the Amber Moon outnumbered the Swamp Knights. They locked down Golta's formation with their faithless chaff, and seized control of the fortress engine with their elite warriors. As the battle began to tip in the wolves' favor, their fearsome confessor battered through to the front and obliterated both of the Myclops, felling each one with a single blow of his relic hammer, and marking each kill with a triumphant howl. Answering the cry with her own, Darlock lashed out with her cloak of vines and dragged the confessor to her feet before plunging her blade through its heart. The fortress was lost. Both sides had taken great casualties, but Golta's retinue simply couldn't cut through the faithless pack and reclaim the engine. The surviving handful of knights retreated through the trees, leaving the roar of flames and beasts behind them. Recounting of September 30th, 1423, the year of the Lord of Man. It was not long after our alliance with the human Caroleans that we had made contact with a party of heretics. One of our number had spotted a fortress overrun with swamp growth, with warriors and beasts of the swamp emerging from it. It was a strange sight to behold for certain, but the stench they gave off was unmistakable. The stench of oblivion. These demons were slaves to the fog. I was the first to lead the charge, taking the faithless into the center of the fortress where the source of their power lie, engaging one of their vine beasts and slaying it with ease. But alas, my actions proved reckless, for one of their warriors was able to fell me in turn. I do not know how I ultimately survived, but the efforts of the apothecary proved crucial in restoring me to full strength. Sacristan Amedius informed me on what transpired afterwards. Confessor Andronicus took control of the faithless and counterattacked the demon's main force, slaying their giants before being killed in turn. But victory was attained when the apothecary, sacristan, and redeemer struck at their source of power. Victory, but at a cost. Confessor Andronicus, chaplain Dance, and 2 faithless lost their lives that day. But their deaths were not in vain. We shall call forth more of our brothers, and afterwards we shall march forth once more. May God have mercy on these heretics, for we shall not. Principality Tokomoda, servant of the Lord of Man. If you stayed around this far, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. And if you yourself want to contribute to the growing lore of If Worlds Collide, then consider joining the community Discord. Link is in the description below. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.